up, guys? So today we are moving on. If you're here, we are doing 6.3, which is congruent triangles by angle, side, angle, and angle, angle, side. So on the other lesson, we turned two ways how you can figure out two triangles are congruent. And now you're about to look at two different ways to figure out two triangles are congruent. So you can end up finding all the pieces of that triangle. So let's jump into that and good luck. All right, guys, so let's look at our first one here. So on the key points, I have something called an angle, side, angle. So the thing you need to make sure you understand, that side is included. Included means in between your two angles. It's in the middle. So angle, side, angle. The side is in the middle. See, it's in the middle right there. So if two angles and the included side of one triangle are congruent to the corresponding parts of another triangle, then those two triangles are congruent to each other. So let's go and look at this. So right now I have angle B here. It looks like it has one little notch. So angle Y down here has one notch, okay? I have angle AB has one line, XY has one line, and it looks like angle X has two marks, and angle A has two marks. So those are all corresponding to each other. So pay attention to the order. One angle, one notch, two angle. One angle, one notch, two angle. It follows the same pattern and it looks the same way. So since all of that looks the same way and follows the same pattern, that means these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle, knowing that that side is included. So then you would end up having to write the congruent statement off of the congruent parts. So again, angle, side, angle, okay? Now the next one here is gonna be angle, angle, side. So again, I'm following two angles that are congruent to each other, and then the third side is having to be the congruent side. And we need to make sure we follow that same pattern. So it says, if two angles and the non-included side, remember, not included means it's not in between those, included means in between, side of a triangle are congruent to the corresponding parts of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent to each other. So we need to make sure and look at the correct order here, okay? So let's go and look at this example. So now, if we look at this triangle here, I have two notches here, so 1, 2, and then I have one notch, so that's two angles. So we need to follow the same order. So two notch, one notch, and then that third side is going to be congruent right there, okay? Now let's go ahead and look at our other side here. So I have two notches, I have one notch here, and what I notice in the same order, I have 2, 1, then my side. I have 2, 1, but what do y'all notice? This side is not congruent. So that means, technically speaking, these two triangles are not congruent to each other. I was just throwing this in here to show you guys that this is a possibility. So that means in order for both of these to be congruent to each other, KL and TU has to be congruent to each other. So that means this side would be the one that needs to be congruent. So again, angle, angle, side, same angle, the same side. So not this one. So technically speaking, if we left it the way it was, those wouldn't be congruent to each other. But since now I made it to where both of those are congruent to each other, that means the two sides are congruent, okay? All right, so on example number 1 here, it says, are the two triangles congruent? If so, we need to write the congruent statement, okay? So let's go and look at what I already know. I have a side, so one side. I have an angle here that's congruent, okay? And so now I'm trying to figure out if there's anything else that's congruent to each other. So if you look, this line here and this line here are crossing each other. So what that tells me is that the two angles that are vertical to each other are congruent to each other. So that means this angle right here and this angle right here are congruent to each other. So let's go ahead and look. I have angle, angle, and then the side. I have an angle, and then the side. So it follows the same pattern. So two angle, one angle, then the side. Two angle, one angle, then the side. So that means these two triangles are going to be congruent by angle, angle, and side, okay? And so now we need to go ahead and write the congruent statement. So I'll go ahead and write GHK, so triangle GHK is equal to, and then I need to write the corresponding parts to it, okay? So if I look here, I have my one side and then I have this side going here. I have my one side and then this side going here. So that means J is going to be the same thing as G. So triangle J. So now if I look here, H is congruent to I over here, because if you look, mark and mark, so it's going to be I here, or H. Sorry, I'm looking at H, my bad. So H's are going to be congruent to each other, so H. And then K and I are going to be congruent to each other, so I goes together. And so now your sides are even going to match up, because I'm going to show you here. So if I look, I have GH, so GH and JH, those are congruent to each other. I have HK and HI right here, so HK and HI here, those are going to be congruent to each other. And then thirdly, I have G and K and J and I, so G and K and J and I. So if you write the correct congruent statement, it's going to tell you what all angles are congruent to each other and what all sides are congruent to each other as well. Okay, let's move over to example number 2. On example number 2, it says, are the two triangles congruent? If so, we need to write the congruent statement. So right here, looking at this, I have side NL, I have side LM are congruent to each other, and I have RS and RQ that are congruent to each other. And now if you look in here, it's telling me angles that are congruent to each other. So I know R is going to be equal to L, so R and L are the same thing, so I'm going to put one mark here and one mark here. And then it says S and N are congruent to each other. So I know N, I'm going to put 2, and S is going to put 2 as well. Okay? And so now if we go ahead and look, let's look at my combo here. So I have 1, then I have the 3 side, and I have the 2 side. Let's see, I have the same combo. So I have 1, I have the 3 side, and I have the 2 angle. So 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2. So it looks like it's going to end up matching the same combo. So that means these two triangles are going to be congruent by angle, side, angle. And so now I need to write the congruent statement, right? So let's go ahead and just write. So I'm going to have L, N, M, right? So I'm going to do this triangle right here. I'm going to do triangle L, N, M. And just so you know, it doesn't necessarily matter how you write the first one as long as you write the corresponding parts the correct way on the second one. So angle L is going to be congruent to R. So I'm going to put R first. N is congruent to S. So I'm going to put S first. And then M would be congruent to Q. So that means LNM is going to be equal to RSQ. Because now the sides are congruent and all the angles are congruent because they are congruent by angle, side, angle. Okay? Let's jump over to example number 3. Okay, on example number 3, it's saying, what other information is needed to prove the triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle? So that means I need 2 angles congruent, and then the side that is included in between those has to be congruent as well. Okay, so right now if we look, I have 1 angle that's congruent. I have 1 notch over here, so there's 1 angle that's congruent. I have an angle with 2 notches. I have an angle here with 2 notches, so that's 2 angles. And the side that is in between those has to be congruent. Well, if I look, I have 1 and 2. The angle, the side is not congruent. I have 1 and 2. The side is not congruent. So that means this side right here needs to be congruent to this side right here in order for it to be angle, side, angle. So that means side, KL, needs to be congruent to side, UT. And that will end up making them congruent by angle, side, angle. So that information, just that information, will then prove that the 2 triangles are congruent. Okay? All right, guys, again, we're jumping over to the challenge question. If you guys can do this challenge question on your own, that means you're ready to move on to the skill check. If you're having trouble with this, you can either call me over and we can talk a little bit and kind of get an idea of what you're not understanding, or you can go and do either a quizzes or a booklet that I've provided and do a little bit of practice and then go back and try this to see if you're ready to move on to your skill check. If you're needing help, holler at me. I'm free to help. Other than that, good luck with your skill check. Good luck.